Good morning, everybody who's just joining. We're about to start this event in any moment now. Good morning, everybody. Very warm welcome to you with Empire Fighting Chance, an event in conversation with Charlotte Leslie, Inside Politics, Brexit, Bristol and the Charity. My name's James Jury. I'm the Chief Executive of the Bristol Chamber of Commerce and Initiative Business West. We're delighted to be partnering on this event. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity for you to hear and talk a bit about politics at a time when we've got so much going on, so much change going on, and clearly we are listening to our politicians on a national level and a local level at a time of big change, both clearly around the pandemic, but also about our exit now from the European Union, what that means for business, how business and politics interface, and with Charlotte able to give us some of her insights about what's going on and her view of about the politicians and how that intersects with us. So I think we've got some fascinating discussion, and then we're going to hear about the charity itself. And I know the fantastic work it does, and we hear about some of what it's been up to, but also what they're planning to do into the future. So I'm going to not say anything other than we're delighted to support this event, and great to have lots of you on the call this morning. We are recording this meeting, so just so you're aware. And for those of you I know who perhaps got to step off for other meetings from sort of 9 o'clock, we will be distributing a copy of the recording so you can catch up on the bit you miss. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the host for the event today, who is author and BBC correspondent Andrew Hosken. Andrew, over to you.
Well, thanks very much, James, and good morning, everyone. Just on the off chance that some of you may never have heard of me, my name is Andy Hosken, and for more than 30 years or so, until November, I worked as a BBC reporter, mainly for Radio 4 programmes, such as the Today programme and The World Tonight. During my time with the Beeb, I probably covered many of the sort of biggest stories, I suppose, over the past few decades, from the attacks in America, September the 11th, through to revolutions in Libya and Ukraine, the ISIS terror campaign in Iraq, and nearer to home, the Grenfell fire, Brexit, and of course, the current pandemic. Anyway, that's enough of me boasting about my so-called exploits. In fact, COVID's impact on disadvantaged communities featured among my last reports to the BBC, as did, in fact, Empire Fighting Chance and Martin Bisp, who I interviewed for the programme. So I know we'll be touching on that impact during the course of this event. So just a rough outline of what will be happening, hopefully, over the next hour or so. In a moment, I'll be talking to Charlotte Leslie about the state of politics, and goodness, what a state it is. She's also hoping to take some questions from some of you, so please think of some and I'll put them to her on your behalf. She'll be talking about what she thinks is going on with politics in the UK. There's a lot going on, her experiences in Westminster, and with Brexit now fully on us and the current lockdown, she'll be answering your questions, hopefully, about what businesses can expect in 2021. Charlotte's also a founding trustee of Empire Fighting Chance, which supports young people across Bristol, Wales and the South West. And I've been to Bristol myself to see the amazing work they do at first hand. And as we all know, the pandemic has disproportionately affected the young, and especially those from disadvantaged and minority ethnic communities. Then from 9, we'll be hearing from Martin Bisp, the CEO of Empire Fighting Chance, about their frontline work, the challenges of some of these young people, what they're facing, and how Empire Fighting Chance and businesses can help transform the lives of young people by collaborating and working together, hopefully with some of you in the future as well. And then around 9:10, we'll again be talking to Charlotte with a full Q&A session. You can ask me some questions about the media if you think that's interesting, possibly not. So please get thinking about the questions you want to ask, and then we can put them to her later. COVID, Trump, Brexit, to name but a few of the incredible phenomena that's been impacting all of our lives in recent years. It means, I think it's safe to say, that we're living in what the Chinese would describe as interesting times. And well, who better to try and make sense of them than Bristol's very own Charlotte Leslie? As many of you know, Charlotte was for 7.5 years or so the Conservative MP for Bristol North West until the election of 2017, when her local voters decided that she could do with a rest. She started in 2010 as one of the so-called Cameron Cuties, and in fact was his big society czar, or one of them for a while. During her time in the Commons, she caused trouble, uncovering various NHS scandals, which hardly endeared her to certain government ministers, but it did at least win her the prestigious 2013 Backbencher of the Year award. She's currently the director of the Conservative Middle East Council, or CMEC, which aims to foster understanding of that complex region among Conservative MPs and others. And Charlotte, as I said, is also a founding trustee of CEO, and in fact, even boxed herself a bit in her teens. Now, Charlotte, you all seem fairly sane to me. So why on earth did you go into politics in the first place? Was it just for the money?
Oh, obviously the money. The 10-year-old me would have been absolutely horrified to know I was going to become an MP. I always distrusted authority, and a lot of my teachers will say that I wasn't always the most well behaved with it, but I wanted to change stuff. I looked at the world around me, and where other people were able to say, oh, okay, let's just let that go, I found I wasn't able to let it go. And I was very angry about it, which is incidentally why I started boxing, because I was so angry. But I found myself gravitating towards politics as a way to make a difference, and as an outlet for that energy. So when you're an MP, you can look at the world around you and say that's wrong, and you're not as powerless as you are if you're just a normal person. You can go into Parliament, you can use the mechanisms of Parliament to change stuff. You can also be a voice for people who don't have a voice in that magic room, the chamber of the House of Commons. And that's really what drove me into politics. And of course, when you get there, you find that it's actually not nearly as much about changing stuff and getting stuff done as kind of you think from the outside. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that you have to wade through like a toxic fog with your nose held. But that was the reason I got into politics.
I mean, there seems to be a lot of sort of things getting in the way of wanting to do stuff in politics. You've got your politics at Westminster and all the stuff that goes on there with the infighting and the coups and all the rest of it. And then, of course, you've got all the stuff you have to do as an MP, a backbench MP, with people's plumbing problems, social services issues, housing issues, and all the rest of it. I mean, is it almost impossible in that environment to get stuff done?
People often say, what are MPs doing? There is a dialogue that says, what are MPs doing constituency work? You know, aren't they elevated councillors? And I think this goes back to the issue that I know a lot of us are thinking about at the moment, is why is politics so out of touch? And the constituency work for me was my reality library. You know, you go to the House of Commons and there's a library full of books, but actually books only tell you what someone else wrote at that time. To actually know what's going on in the world, I found my constituency hugely refreshing to actually get back to real life. Of course, you don't see it as real life because you're the MP, which makes you different and in some way separate from it. But you can understand what's actually going on, because in the House of Commons, you never get that version of reality. It's always filtered through some party that wants to make some point, whether it's your party saying we're awesome or the other party saying they're terrible. You never get to the actual stuff. And I've always thought that politics should be much more like fixing the boiler than all the power games and everything else. You know, what do we know about water? What do we know about people? What do we know about gravity? What tools do we need to fix this? Politics gets into the plumbers arguing amongst themselves whose branding's best. So my constituency was always my reality library. And it's the thing I most miss about being in politics, actually, is that ability to see lots of friends who I built up over that time, but to get that wide view, I guess as you do in the media, you get a wide view of a whole section of life that you'd never normally experience. But Parliament shuts you out from that.
Yeah, depends which part of the media you're in, I suppose, and politics. But I mean, in bubbles, we're all supposed to be in bubbles now, aren't we? We're in bubbles on social media. We're in bubbles because of COVID. Of all people, politicians seem to be in a total world of their own. They don't seem to, many of them don't seem to, you know, appreciate what goes on in the outside world, what goes on in businesses. And we're seeing this disconnect over Brexit at the moment. Why?
that kind of goes, yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two reasons that struck me. When I became an MP, I thought, oh no, am I going to turn into an MP? Am I going to become different in some way? And there's two things I think that make you step away from reality, unless you work very, very hard not to, like swimming against a current. Firstly, it's the environment. Don't underestimate the impact it has on your brain to walk into this huge Gothic building that you call your office and suddenly have a bunch of people opening doors for you and calling you ma'am. It's very easy to suddenly feel ever so important. And it's really easy with this pass, this parliamentary pass. I've still got one, but I don't know where it is. Otherwise I'd show you, to feel that you're kind of allowed into the inner sanctum of the country, that you're in some way just that little bit more special than everybody else. And because you're living what you're reading about in the newspapers, it's easy to think that you have just a little bit more of an insight than people outside that magic building. And then, of course, you go into the chamber, which is this crazy place where people make noises they'd never make anywhere else in normal life. Like, I remember the first time I heard people saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I thought, what on earth are you doing? You can easily think in that chamber that if you say something, it's the same as doing it. So you can say, oh, we're doing X, Y, and Z for businesses. And it's very easy to think that in that magic room with the green seats, that has actually happened. Which I think brings me on to the second reason I think it's easy to get out of touch, is the kinds of people who go into it tend to be naturally people who love politics. And I think we have less of a range of skills because you haven't got, I was very lucky to do some surf lifeguarding, which taught me that you can't press release a person off a rock in a whomping surf. You actually have to do it. But I think in recent years, people have been encouraged to be only politicians. And that gets quite a narrow range of skills, which is not connected with practicalities, running a business, doing the kind of stuff that people, watching today and listening today will do on a daily basis. Yeah. And I think the key to being a good politician is to know that you're not an expert and to ask the experts.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are far too many journalists in the House of Commons, probably 2 or 3 too many in particular cases. But there does seem to be, professionalization of politics now, isn't there? You don't get the mix you would have had 20, 30 years ago of businessmen and doctors. The sort of mix you actually get in the House of Lords, funnily enough, because people have achieved something and often have been elevated to the Lords because of it.
Absolutely. And I think where you do get in the House of Commons, where you get people who've done things, particularly doctors, if you look at the doctors who've been MPs, they've been disproportionately independent of their parties, whichever party they're involved in. And I think that's because their focus is actually getting stuff done. And I think, if you're going to go into it, I think there's probably scientists are really good in politics because they look at evidence bases. I always used to feel, I was never very interested in politics. I didn't study it at school. I certainly didn't get involved in it at university. I thought it was a lot of old guff. But that was a great blessing, really, because it meant that I wasn't as distracted by who's saying what about who and all the power play. How do we change it? I don't know. Hopefully we'll be coming to that. But I think one of the things I found frustrating when I first arrived in politics was, and I said this in my maiden speech, how Parliament's walls are the thickest in existence, because the world inside politics in Parliament and then St Thomas's Hospital just across the river were completely different worlds. And I knew that because my dad's a doctor. How you break down those walls, I think, is one of the biggest questions. And you could see the problems that it was presenting. I saw constituents, and I know I'll come on to Brexit, raising concerns about huge changes in their community that they'd seen and a political system that they felt just didn't listen to them. And to be honest, having a foot in both the community and Parliament, I had to agree with them. The system wasn't listening to them. And to begin with, people were making their points in very polite ways. I'm not very comfortable my community's changed. I want you guys to kind of listen to my life. And the political class would just say, oh, no, you don't know anything, you didn't go to my school. That was a real problem. And I think we're facing the consequences of it now.
Yeah, just to remind people, please put your questions in if you want to ask Charlotte. We'll be hopefully doing some Q&A in 5 minutes or so, and later on in this morning. Just on the issue of boxing, people often say, boxing experts like Martin, like Jamie and others will say you should never fight angry. And yet all you see is anger on TV, on radio, people bellowing at each other, politicians mainly bellowing at each other, politicians bellowing at us, on TV, in the social media. Why is it, and we've seen this in America, why is everyone so angry all of a sudden? Why is that? Why is politics increasingly polarised? Well, that's what it seems like.
Yeah, I saw this change firsthand. 2010, when I first became an MP, or 2006 when I was a candidate, quite a long time ago, people weren't nearly as angry. And I saw that change. And I think the first thing I noticed about it was social media. And if anyone can I recommend a brilliant documentary, The Social Dilemma, which is on Netflix. There's a commercialization of our anger and our outrage. You know, human beings like spectacle, and so we're built for clicks. And I think people have great incentives to tribalize us and make money out of our anger. The other thing is, I think the world has changed a lot in, say, the time I've been in politics. And when there's huge change, people become very frightened. Identities are challenged. And when your identity is challenged, you want to feel safe and you want to be with other people like you, which also sort of mitigates towards tribes. These are my people, so those people over there are definitely not my people. And it makes you feel safe to be part of something. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is we've had huge technological change. Look at how we're speaking to each other now. 10 years ago, this would have been some, almost crazy witchcraft. Travel, people of global travel. One of the things about Brexit is that it did see in some communities a great demographic identity shift. And I think we are all fighting to find our identities in this new world. And often that brings out the very worst in us. Add to that a kind of a distorted, corrupted capitalism where you have not government monopolies and unaccountable bodies, but private sector monopolies and unaccountable bodies far bigger than any government. And you've got a whole new way that democracy and capitalism, so-called, is working, and a very disempowered population who find that maybe they can't make the changes that they want to see through straightforward democracy, because they have this idea that somewhere something bigger is going on involving multinational companies, Panama Papers, billionaires, that they and democracy can't begin to touch, because that now begins to own democracy.
Great, Charlotte. Well, thanks very much. And we'll be talking about, how we can fix things. I mean, has the social media, Brexit, the COVID, shown that we need a new constitution or some kind of new settlement, because it's shown our old democracy to be in need of repair, possibly. I don't know. They're big questions, not for me to answer, for you to answer, not me. Now, I've got some questions here, so I'll just see if I can. I'll have a small print, so you'll have to excuse me. This is Frank Noble. Empire fighting chance does so much more than supporting disadvantaged people. As CEO of a Bristol charity, Empire fighting chance has been supporting my son for a while now. Shouldn't we celebrate the work that organisations like EFC do to support community need and cohesion, bringing people from all areas together rather than focus on disadvantage? What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And one of the things I found as a politician was often you get people in to solve problems who don't know anything about the problem. Empire is born of the community, and it knows the community and knows people. And what I love about it, it's all about you as a person, rather than what demographic you might be from and how someone on a census might categorize you. And I think the more we can just talk about helping people, obviously there are people who need a lot more help materially than other people, but actually the great thing about Empire Fighting Chance is it's about what's in here, and we all face the same mental challenges sometimes. People with disadvantage face far more, but it talks about people and not about demographics, which I think is so important, because it's so easy for all of us to become a demographic and then see each other as demographics, which dehumanizes us. So I can't support the work that Empire does enough. And this is the first time I've addressed the Bristol audience as not an MP, I think. And I was quite nervous about it. I said I might get a lot of virtual cabbages thrown at me through the screen, but I would only do something nice for Empire because they do such amazing work.
Now, this is from Suzanne Thompson, who has to leave at 9 o'clock for another meeting. So she says, good morning and lovely to see you, and back to you.
Hi, Suzanne.
Right. She says, now, she wanted to highlight the impact of the pandemic on prison leavers, because many are experiencing significant deterioration in mental health, and there's a notable lack of support from statutory agencies, leaving organisations like the Restore Trust to pick up the work to support some quite vulnerable people, often presenting as homeless, experiencing food poverty and digital poverty, as many services now need to be accessed online. The Restore Trust is really concerned about politics and criminal justice and how the lack of sentencing discretion now means many individuals are imprisoned rather than receiving support to address the causes of offending behaviour. This is another area, Suzanne says, where sport and health and well-being can all play a part.
Absolutely, and I haven't seen Suzanne for quite some time, so hello. And the Restore Trust does do amazing work. The trouble with COVID is it's revealed and cast a light on inequalities that have existed for a long time, but people haven't really wanted to know, and it's really revealing them. And I mean, again, one of the reasons I love boxing is it can be so good for people whose lives have ended up going the wrong way and end up in prison. And one of the things that I was pushing for as an MP was for boxing to be something that goes on in prisons as a method for rehabilitation. And this is what Empire Fighting Chance understands, and often people don't understand, is the rehabilitative attributes of boxing, which are really second to none, particularly people with anger issues. But I think as a country, we haven't worked out what we want to do with prisons and what they're for. And it just makes no sense at all not to make prisons rehabilitative centres. You know, if you have your freedom deprived from you, that is punishment enough, to be honest. But you have literally a captive audience, often of people who have really deep needs and huge potential. And it's been a great frustration to me that we can't put rehabilitative and mechanisms like Empire Fighting Chance into prisons and transform our captive audience. And sport and prison life and rehabilitation is so important. There's a guy called John McAvoy, who I've worked with, who's a great friend, who was a very violent offender. One of his prison officers found that he was very good in the gym on a rowing machine. He went on to beat the world indoor rowing record, is now completely rehabilitated and has devoted his life to helping people like him who've ended up in prison, violent offenders, find themselves through sport. And we need so much more of that. And we need to get that into civil service and MPs and government to really viscerally understand. And that was a mission when I was an MP. And I don't think I got very far, to be honest. I did try.
Sorry to butt in there. Earlier we've got another somebody putting a question through anonymously, which is of course their right. The question is: it sounds like you're advocating a different type of person to enter politics. How do you engage these different people and make it more accessible and make it more diverse?
It's a really good question, and one of the first challenges is that at the moment, to be honest, you could almost say few sane people want to go into politics because you get so much abuse and the amount you feel you can do is not necessarily huge. I found, I mean, how did I do it? The more politicians and MPs who can talk about what it's like to be an MP or out in their community, the more they'll meet people who may not think that they're good for politics, may not see themselves as politicians, but are precisely the people who should be. And I mean, one of the things that I loved about my previous job was meeting people who became councillors, who never thought they'd become a councillor, but actually had all the skills that were needed. And then sometimes those people go, hang on, I could probably do that MP job. I don't feel like an MP, but I think I could do the job, or someone else says you can do the job. It's about, I mean, that phrase that we use a lot, reaching out, but really reaching out. And politicians are the best to do that. So it's a vicious circle. If you haven't got a political class that is naturally reaching out, you're going to narrow down your number of people who go in. But my tip to kids at school, or anyone really, but often school kids, is if you're angry about stuff and want to change it, but you don't like establishment and politicians, you're the perfect person to become a politician.
Now, this is something, a really interesting question from Nathan Peacey about what happens in the future, possibly as a result of what's happening now, is do you think a proportional representation type voting system would help drive a more consensus-based politics?
Do you know, it's funny, if you'd asked me that 7 or 8, 10 years ago, I'd have said definitely not. But I think we've got a huge problem. Part of the reason Brexit has happened and the division has happened is obviously because the parliamentary system hasn't reflected people properly. And I think, you know, the small number of UKIP MPs, the ratio of votes compared to other parties, it just doesn't make any sense. So absolutely. What it is, I think we have to be very careful about, because there's a temptation to think that something's going to solve problems. You probably will still end up getting sort of safer seats. And if the kind of people who go into it don't want to work together, that's not going to solve all the problems. But I think something like, I think a change in our voting system is needed, because it obviously hasn't worked. What I'd say about PR specifically is that the most valuable, I think, thing for elected politicians is a very close proximity to an area which they are accountable to and know and build a relationship with. You don't want to strip that out of the system. That would further dislocate your politicians from reality. But I think what has happened, I often say that politics is an answer to a question. And I think Labour and Conservative were outdated because they were answers to an economic question, closed and open economies. I think the question moved on quite rapidly, and politics didn't realise, and we're still talking about Labour and Conservative open closed economies. The new question has been about identity. How do you see your identity? Located with a place, or more located with a sense of values? And that articulated itself broadly through the Brexit Remain vote. And actually what you had was a division that should have been two parties, and that's how our democracy was supposed to function. But it kind of short-circuited it, probably because of what you're talking about, some problem in our electoral system. I have to say, and this is something for us to think about for democracy, I've seen that identity question change again from identity, what's your identity, to how do you want to do politics? Do you want a strictly rules-based politics? Or do you want to be a politics that kind of is a bit like Trump, breaks all the rules and is a bit more gangstery? Do you follow the rules, or do you break the rules to govern? Now, I would be very sceptical about breaking the rules. I think go to very dangerous places. But I think if you want to characterise it as team gangster versus team integrity, that may be the new division that we're looking at in politics, and certainly what we saw, I think, play out in America.
Now, I'm just conscious of the time of it. We're coming up to 9 o'clock. So probably time for one more. Again, from somebody who doesn't want to be named, but many reports say that Brexit will harm the most disadvantaged in society. Do you think that's true? And if it is true, then how do politicians and businesses tackle it?
As Brexit is playing out at the moment, who knows? I think there's a huge danger that it will, and possibly already is, hitting the worst off as we see changes in supply chains, prices going up. I mean, people who voted for this, did they foresee this? No, I don't think many did. Should they have done? Yeah, we should. I should have done. How do we address it? It's going to be very difficult. If the country goes through very difficult times, we've got to completely change the way politics happens if we're going to make sure that really the most disadvantaged do well out of this, or do survive this the best and get the most resources towards them. I think as a community, we're going to all have to pull together, but I think that the government does need to really refocus down on people who are the least well off, particularly as this hits. Of course, that's going to be difficult because the most well off generally have the loudest voices and get their voices heard. And again, back to that's what the role of backbench politicians is to make sure their constituents' voices are heard.
Great. Well, thanks, Charlotte. We'll be coming back to you for a Q&A later on, but thanks for those insights. Very interesting, I thought. Anyway, there'll be more, as I say, questions, opportunities to ask Charlotte questions a little later, so please keep those questions coming in. Now, I'd now like to introduce Martin Bisp, who's the CEO of Empire Fighting Chance. I believe, Martin, the charity began when you and Jamie Sanegar spotted young men dealing drugs in a park near the Empire Boxing Club in Easton, in North Bristol, where Jamie's dad, Chris, was busy turning out European and world champions. Is that back in 2006 or something like that?
Yeah, I've run the Empire Amateur Boxing Club since probably 2001. And during that time, Jamie and I became friends. So it was a Friday evening, and we used to run a junior amateur session on a Friday evening. So I used to stop in the gym on the way back from work. And Jamie and I were sat in the office. At the time, I was working as a business analyst. Jamie was running some family businesses. And we saw two young men that we vaguely knew were dealing drugs in the park, St Agnes Park, opposite the gym. If I'm honest, for reasons that I really still don't know, we went over and we tackled them. I think we've had enough. We've had enough of picking up needles when we trained in the park. We had enough of addicts shooting up and taking drugs in the alley. We had enough of prostitutes accosting parents using the gym. So we just decided there and then we were going to do something about it. We asked them to come back in the gym. We did a one-to-one training session, sent them on the way. We didn't think anything more of it. On the Monday, they came back with a couple of friends. The Tuesday, a couple more. And within sort of 6 weeks, we had 50 young people coming 5 days a week. So Jamie and I were a bit like, oh, what are we going to do? We were doing 2 days each and flipping a coin for day 3. And then a few things happened. School started ringing up to say, actually, you've been working with Jamal. His behaviour's improved. Could you consider working with Denzel? We had enough sense to charge the schools, so we could bring in some part-time coaches. And then, and I always say it was 2 weeks, but it may not have been. 2 things happened which really changed our view. One was we had a young man who used to come, do circuits. He'd be polite, he'd set the circuits up, he'd stay at the end and tidy them away. And the school said, we're going to throw him out. And we really couldn't understand it. And in the end, we sat him down and said, look, this is getting serious, what's going on? And he kind of said, I just don't get maths. So rather than hold his hand up and say, I don't understand it, he'd turn the table over, he'd walk out. And, you know, if you'd seen Jamie and I try and do the annual accounts, you'd realise how bonkers it sounds. But we said, OK, we'll do some maths for you. So we sat down and tried to do some basic maths to give him confidence to stay in school. And alongside that, we had a young person referred to us who had obvious mental health problems. And we rang the school and said, listen, he's not naughty, he's just not well. And their reaction, and I will stress this, was 2006, possibly early 2007, was, look, actually, we just want him off site. We haven't got many young people with mental health problems, we just want him off site for half a day. So in our naivety, we rang the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, said, look, he's not well, can you help him? Conversation went, is he at crisis point? No, I don't think so. Has he tried to kill himself? No. Well, then we can. Oh, but if he was at that point, we couldn't see him for 6 months and treat him for a further 6. So there and then, Jamie and I decided that we wanted to do things that tackled the core problem and not the symptoms. So we knew boxing on its own was never going to be enough. We wanted to do programs that actually help people get back into school and get back into work.
I read in one of your annual reports, I think for 2019, that more than 4,000 young people were, you know, engaged with the charity during the course of the year. It's an incredible amount, really. I was quite, having been to the club and seen the size of it and all the rest, I was amazed by how many young people you managed to see and train and look after.
Yeah, I mean, we run various programs. I mean, I will say at this point that the charitable stuff is all non-contact. So what we do is we use in boxing training with psychology, therapy, careers. But we work across South Wales, so we work in 16 areas of South Wales. We work in Bristol, we run sessions all day, every day. We go into schools, we work in people's communities, as well as the gym. So that number reflects really the multiple locations that we work.
I mean, what sort of impact has COVID had on the young people and families that you deal with? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, probably disproportionate. And we spoke about this in the summer when I came to the club to interview you.
COVID's been hard, you know, the pandemic's been hard, and I don't think we should shy away from that. For example, we're seeing more and more referrals for more and more young people with increasingly complex needs since the first lockdown. And also these needs range from sort of mental health issues all the way through to young people being targeted and groomed by gangs and drug dealers. In the background of this, we're talking about services that are stretched, services that have been reduced, and in some cases, services that have been stopped. So you've got this perfect storm of people struggling with nowhere to go for help. From our point of view, you know, we just weren't going to stop. Jamie and I said the minute the pandemic, it was obvious, I think, from maybe end of February, we were going to be in some kind of lockdown at some point. So Jamie and I sat there and said, well, what are we going to do? And you've got 2 choices. You could kind of preserve your organisation or you can preserve your mission. And we decided whatever happened, we were going to preserve the mission. So we looked at different ways of supporting. We tried Zoom immediately after the lockdown. So we run sort of one-to-one small group and therapy sessions. Everybody, so effectively they are our most vulnerable young people we work with. Everybody that attended one of those sessions was immediately contacted on Monday to say, we will carry on. It may be Zoom, it may be face-to-face, whatever happens, you will be supported. Then we used Zoom. Then we were doing stuff in tower block car parks, so the piece of grass outside somebody's house when restrictions eased a little bit. Then we built an outside gym with a canopy in the basketball court to ensure we could carry on and eventually could get back in the gym. What I'm really proud of is there isn't a single young person since the start of lockdown that's come to us for help that we've not supported, not a single one. And we even delivered at one point, the Pasco Group, who own a number of Subway franchises, they donated, well, I would say parcels, but it was more like food hampers really to us, and we delivered food to families that really couldn't afford to eat. So at one point we were feeding a number of families who couldn't buy food, were really struggling with their mental well-being, and that was kind of our response.
And just to remind people, please keep the questions coming in for everybody. That's Martin and Charlotte and James Sanagar as well, who's Martin's comrade in arms at Empire Fighting Chance. Martin, looking ahead to your future plans and strategic priorities, I mean, how do you envisage developing the charity and the services in the community?
There's a few bits. I mean, the first one is we need to make sure that young people in Bristol and South Wales continue to be supported. So that's going to be the number one priority. What we're doing there is we've appointed some new coaching staff. We've appointed a new boxing therapy manager, and she will continue to work alongside our current therapist partner, NAOS, to ensure that we can meet more and more demand from the young people that need us. Alongside that, we've been under, I don't know if pressure is quite the right word, but I'll use the word pressure, to work in different areas. So funders have been saying that your results are great, your programs are innovative, could you work somewhere else? Jamie and I have had some conversations with various local governments and various governments to try and work out whether or not that might be practical. We got to a point where we realised that setting up 20 or 30 miniature Empire Fighting Chances just wasn't going to work. There was a danger that it would put too much stress and strain on the sort of core of Bristol and South Wales. So we decided to trial a partner programme. At the moment, we have, I think it's 14 partners in areas in Devon, Cornwall, Dorset and North Wales. And those partners have been trained in our programme, what we call Training the Champions. So effectively, it's a non-contact boxing programme with psychotherapy and personal development points all the way through it. So far, those partners have worked with in excess of 1,500 people, even during the pandemic. And we would expect over the next maybe 1 to 2 years for those numbers to increase to maybe double the number of partners. And we would expect to have a national presence of some description over the next 18 months. I think alongside that, we've got a few other exciting opportunities. So we've been doing some work strategically with the Home Office and with the All Party Parliamentary Group for boxing, and having conversations about how boxing can be used as a tool for social change. We have done both the theory but the practical. So we're working with a youth justice board in North Wales, and young people are actually going through our programme as mandated by the Crown Court. So what we're looking to do is reduce imprisonments and give young people the chance to get back into whatever it may be, whether it's school or work. We're having similar conversations with the Youth Justice Board in Greater Manchester. So we're kind of looking at the theory about how we can reduce offending, and we're actually practically delivering sessions that are reducing offending. Alongside that, we are just started a 2-year evaluation with Manchester Met Uni, which has been sponsored by the Home Office. And again, the idea of that is to see how we might be a solution or a long-term solution to youth violence. And then finally, a little bit odd maybe, but Manchester Met Uni have asked if they can put us on one of their courses. They do a criminology course, and we're going to be one of the modules that the undergraduates will study. And it will be really about our approach to reducing youth violence and our approach to reducing criminal behaviour, and actually how the system, if you like, can take lessons from the way we're doing things to get better results and to reduce offending. Because, you know, we're lucky in Bristol in some ways. We've got a number of policemen that I think one might actually be on the call that we deal with that have a very enlightened view about how you need to reduce it. You can't police these things out of existence. You need to engage young people. You need to be practical with what you do. And so I'm hoping that by taking part in this course, we can also make a change that way.
Great, Martin. We'll talk more about the work of the charity with you and Jamie Sanagar, who's hopefully joining us now. Jamie, co-founder of your Empire Fighting Chance. His dad, of course, Chris Sanagar, is a celebrated boxing coach in Bristol, and together with him, Jamie, I know you managed some amazing boxers like Dean Francis and Glenn Catley, to name but a few. So hopefully, are you there?
Yep, I should be here, Andy.
Hi, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning.
Great. I mean, how do you think, how challenging has it been for Empire, particularly in this COVID, Brexit, all the rest of it environment, to raise the funds you need to keep going?
I think it's been challenging. for us, we have been quite fortunate in the fact that we've got a good, strong, funding base at the moment. But obviously, our fundraising and our income that we generate from schools is dramatically reduced during this pandemic. So it's been a challenging time, and Martin and I and the trustees and Dave Phillips, who's our treasurer, we've had some challenging times to look over the budget. But overall, I think the fact that we kept our doors open from day one, where no young person was left without support, funders and the community and the public have really got behind us during this time. So it's, for us, I think we've come out of this pandemic so far with really positive outcomes for young people.
In terms of numbers, I know it's very difficult to quantify this, but I know some of your reports have looked at that. I mean, how many young people respond to the sort of work that you do? I mean, what sort of success rate do you have with these kids and families?
For us, I think, when we started this charity, a lot of the focus was around antisocial behaviour, gang culture, that type of stuff that Martin alluded to earlier. And I never sort of imagined that 10 years on, we'd be really tackling deep, complex issues around mental health. Some of the referrals we get nowadays, as a young parent myself, it is quite harrowing, that these are deeper underlying complex issues that, we've never seen before, especially during this pandemic. And to see how we've developed the programs to utilize therapists and real expertise to interlink with the boxing, has allowed us to tackle some really complex issues. And I'm really proud of the way that the charity's been able to step up to tackle these issues.
Well, thanks. And just to remind people, please post some questions for our panel. Charlotte as well is joining us as well. So please keep the questions coming in if you can. That would be great. Just in terms of the kind of people being impacted, I mean, we read a lot about Black and minority ethnic communities, disadvantaged. Obviously, often together they're together. They're the same. They're disproportionate also from in deprived areas as well. I mean, just how has that impacted these people, do you think, COVID?
I think so. In some ways, it feels like another kick. If I can be brutal, so one of the problems we've had is that the austerity policies disproportionately affected the poor. So we're talking about groups of people that maybe have been subjected to cuts and have found life difficult over a number of years. And what we've seen, and I think the pandemic to start has affected everybody, but we believe that it's exacerbated the difference between the sort of have and have-nots in what we've seen. Like I said, even the last maybe 4 years, Jamie, we've had to feed young people. We didn't have to do that before. Young people are big, food poverty has become a big issue. We've worked with, I said, the Pasco group, we've worked with Fair Share, we've had to provide food for sessions because they're not eating. So I think that we've kind of got ourselves in a position where we've ended up with more and more people finding lives more and more difficult, and the policies haven't helped, and then COVID has exacerbated it.
And I've got a question here from Graham England, who's the CEO of the Bristol charity ARA. He says he's concerned about the third sector ability to bid for contracts post-Brexit, as he doesn't think that the government has been thinking has got this far. This will have an even bigger impact on the status of the third sector. How can we make sure that we get the right organisation like EFC, Restore and ARA, in the game, keep, still operating in the way that they want to?
So two things. First of all, morning, Graham. They do great work, ARA, by the way, addiction recovery charity. It's going to be hard, isn't it? Because there's a danger that, and Charlotte might be able to give us some more background, but what tends to happen is there's been a safety first approach as well for a lot of these contracts, the local authorities. So in fact, what you end up with is the bigger charities who sometimes do less of the kind of work in the communities and do the stuff that matters, handing the breadcrumbs down to the smaller organisations. So for me, I think that one of the things that it's hard is for us to access resources. It's for us to go for some of these contracts. Sometimes the paperwork is so difficult, it just puts you off. You end up spending more time filling paperwork in forms than you actually do doing the work, which kind of goes against the stuff that Jamie and I stand for. You know, we're here to help young people. We're not here to fill in endless forms about young people. So I suppose the simplification of the process and better communication and better information would be how I would see it. But I've got no doubt Charlotte can give us a more technical answer than mine.
Right. A few years ago, I might have been able to, Martin, but I think how you get the best agents, the best people to do the work is a really ongoing problem. And back when I first became an MP in 2010, there was all this big society talk. Someone said to me, why don't you not just call it community spirit? And I thought, yeah, I wish we had, kind of. But that underneath all the kind of the headlines and the alliteration was actually quite a lot of serious work to try and work out how you get small charities who don't have that back office capability to get contracts in an era where everyone also wants accountability. And that was the big challenge. And you know, there was a big movement towards the expectation of the right charities taking on the work. But one of the problems with government is people change. So you have a minister who does some really good work, really gets their head around the brief, and then woof, they're gone because some political imperative has moved them on at lightning speed. And I think, I mean, I don't know because I'm not as in touch with what's going on in government these days, but it's vital if we're going back to the previous question, look after the most disadvantaged. We have people who are closest to the most disadvantaged who are there and who are contracted to do it. And one of the reasons I think it's so important is because often if you're very disadvantaged, you've had the system and authorities doing stuff to you all your life. And it's not people who you think understand your life. It's not people you trust. You've been let down a lot. And in those circumstances, if you're going to work with people, they need to trust the people they're working with. And those are charities and people on the ground like Empire Fighting Chance.
Great. Well, we do message from John Hurst here. He's a comment, not a question, he says. Just saying it's rewarding for me, he says, to engage with EFC. I suggest that people should engage, not only to help the charity, but it will help you as well. Yeah, well done to everyone at Empire Fighting Chance. And while Charlotte's on, someone anonymously says, well, how come Charlotte, being a Tory MP, you know, got involved with a inner city boxing club? I mean, the thought of it.
Yeah, politics, I don't think really came into it, to be honest. Charlotte was and still is a great advocate of boxing and was a great advocate for boxing for social change. I think we spoke to Charlotte, possibly, I'm sure it was before, when she rang to ask a question as she was standing as an MP about whether boxing was taught in schools. So we're talking about, I don't know what that would be now, 10, 11, 12 years that Charlotte's been involved.
Don't tell them, Martin.
Sorry?
Don't tell them, it's too long ago.
Yeah, I won't. And, you know, when she got elected, she came to the gym. Now, this is a difficult one to, without generalising, lots of politicians visit a boxing gym for a photo opportunity. They visit it to have a picture of a kid that's going to look good, but they don't really engage. And we've had that a lot. Charlotte engaged. She immediately understood it. She immediately got it. So from our point of view, we were sort of talking to somebody, and we didn't see it as, okay, this is great, we've got a Tory politician. We spoke to somebody, we thought, you know what, Charlotte understands this. She understands what we're trying to do. She can understand how what we're doing can affect social change. So for us, that was the first point. And the second one really is that it's because it's Charlotte that we're a charity. It's quite possible that we would never have been a charity if it hadn't been for Charlotte. So in 2012, possibly, she invited me to an event in London where I met a guy called Luke Downey who set up an international charity. And Charlotte made the intro and kind of said, listen, you could do with helping these guys, Luke. Eventually we got an invite and Jamie went to Rio. I think it was December 2012 and came back and said, look, we need to be a charity. So I suppose really what we should say to all those people that have had blisters like golf balls, running a half marathon or finished last in a quiz or had to listen to me and Jamie talk on multiple occasions, it's all Charlotte's fault and she's very sorry.
Now, this is a message for probably a question for Jamie as well as Martin, but to Jamie now. I mean, how, and again, from someone who doesn't want to be named, but how are the challenges you are seeing young people face different now as to when you started more than a decade or so ago?
Yeah, like I said, I think mental health has been sort of the major key issue that we I guess never really dreamt that we would be tackling. I think early on, Martin and I, as Martin alluded to, mental health became prevalent very early on. And this is a time when schools and partner organizations didn't really want to talk about mental health, So I think for us, understanding that, Martin and I were certainly not mental health specialists, and we're just boxing guys that realized we had to design our own programs because there was nothing out there that could support these young people. Waiting lists with CAMs and whatnot are just, even today, are just as worse as ever with COVID. So I think for us, that austerity obviously is hitting the poorest hardest. I think social media has obviously become a major impact on young people's lives. I think it's had a major impact on their self-esteem and their outlook on life, especially during these lockdown periods where you're on Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat. And whilst it's great to be able to communicate with your friends, it also has such negative, connotations for young people. So like Martin says, we're having to feed young people. Never thought this would be something that we would have to be tackling. We've had to rely on a professional footballer to ensure that young people are fed during these tough times. And these are all the things really now that are at the forefront of our delivery.
Thanks, Jamie. Well, actually, that touches on a question from Susan Pascoe, a question for Charlotte on food and government. We all know how important this is, as highlighted with COVID. COVID seems to impact more the metabolically challenged. Why is this not being talked about after all this time? I mean, quality and type of food, less processed, fewer sugars, fewer carbs, etc. There's so much science on this and the impact on body and minds, yet government appear to ignore it and only mention vitamin D tablets. Can they spend more money on wellness and prevention, or does this not get votes, she asks?
Yeah, good question. It's the long term, and politics has never been very good at the long term. The whole thing is set up for press releases, quick fixes, nice announcements at the dispatch box. And so one of the great challenges is to try and get that long term stuff into the agenda, because it doesn't always make great headlines. The other problem is that politics gets very ideological. And so someone will say, oh, we can't do this because it's government intervention. And then it stops being a debate about food and how we do practical stuff, and then becomes some ideological debate about government intervention, which is not the same thing as making sure that people are healthy. I think I've long thought it's something we need to do. And also it's another area where least well off are most disadvantaged. People who may be working all hours to feed their families don't have time to cook so much for their families, and cooking is generally cheaper than having to buy stuff in. So I think it's a huge problem, and it is a symptom of politics quick hit stuff as opposed to long-term, deep bedded solutions.
Thanks, Charlotte. Well, that brings us roughly around to 9:25. So thanks very much indeed to you, Charlotte, Martin, and Jamie, and Business West Initiative, and James Dury, its CEO, for making this event happen in the first place. Hopefully next time we can actually be in the same room together at the same time. And I do hope you can support Empire Fighting Chance in any way you can. I've seen the work they do, as I say, at first hand, and it really is incredible, the way you're transforming lives and communities, and the way you've been doing it somehow, goodness knows how, through this terrible pandemic. So thank you very much again here this morning, and please keep safe. But to Jamie, just a question to you. What more can businesses and other charities do with Empire Fighting Chance for the future?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think it's important to realise that we're looking for long-term partnerships. The issues discussed today, they can't be solved with a quick fundraiser or a few of your employees, painting a fence for us. This is about working together, sharing ideas, resources, tapping into your expertise and network, working together with our careers team, our fundraising team, to come up with a plan of attack, to tackle these issues head on over the next few years. If you have a will, to want to be part of making a change, and you're still unsure of exactly how you can help, then my suggestion is just get the conversation started with our team. And I'm sure you'll be surprised of how many ways you can get involved. This could be sort of work experience opportunities, mentoring, as an expert in your field, whatever that sector may be, whether it's finance, marketing, design. There are ways you can get involved with our careers programs. From a fundraising perspective, we have a full calendar of events, from virtual quizzes to physical challenges, team building days. When the gym is open, we have a great boxing session for your team. Understand the use of how we use sports psychology within the charity and with our professional boxers and our champions. And now that psychology can be transferred into the workplace, create that winning mentality. We can actually do this virtually at the moment as well. And our fundraising team can work with you to create a bespoke challenge for your business. So the possibilities are really endless. So, my advice is just get in touch and let's get the conversation started and, hopefully go on this journey together.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone could get as much out of it as you would, by participating and collaborating with you and helping you. That's great. Thank you very much, Jamie. Well, it's just remains for me to say thank you very much again to everybody for attending. I hope you can do what you can with Empire Fighting Chance. As I say, I've seen the work they do. It really is amazing. So thanks and goodbye from me. And now over to Nina Skubala from Business West. I hope.
Thanks, Andy, for that. And yeah, thank you to Empire Fighting Chance for letting us partner with you on this event, and Charlotte for giving your time this morning. I think what's been discussed is it's been really important to show what impact business can make in the community, and just how important it is for us from the business side to work with the third sector. And an organisation like ours, with the initiative, we're a placemaking organisation, and we're all about trying to bring the public sector, private sector and third sectors together to make sure that this city region is a prosperous one for everybody. I think, we talked a lot about mental health. It's really important, especially at this time, to connect. So if you are, we do have the Chambers of Commerce who run monthly networking events. It's just really good sometimes just to what else is going on in other companies, and lots of discussion today about some of the practical ways we can help these young people who are working with Empire Fighting Chance. Have a think about how you might be able to provide those young people with some work experience, and if we do need some support to do that, we've got a skills team. This is a funded program that any SME can access, who can work with you on workforce development and helping you to understand how you can go about doing the Kickstart scheme or provide work experience. And again, if you are concerned about mental health of yourself or anyone that's working with you, I have put some links in the chat as well of some of the programs that we're helping to support across the region, particularly on mental health and also on food. So I'd like to thank everyone and just hand back over to Andy.
Hello. Well, I didn't think I was going to be back on again. I thought you'd had enough music. But thanks, Nina. That was great. Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone, for turning up today. It's been really interesting for me as well. As I say, it's a great charity. It does great work in the community. I think everyone can get a lot out of it. So thanks again to Nina, James, Charlotte, Martin, and Jamie, and thanks and goodbye to you all.